how do you go about getting around that?
Yeah, and that's a fair point, right? Like I've had experience with that myself as well. And to your point, you've got that black book, you're going to have to get in there, right? Like I think really goes down to building relationships with those people and like figuring out what is it that they really care about? How can I add value to them? Because I think traditionally what brands tend to do is, and we heard that in the talk, right? Like they think a lot about themselves and what they care about and their brand, rather than what is it that the journalists needs or care about and the value that they want to provide to their own audience. I think if we take that whole, if you look at it from that perspective, it becomes very different in the way we do outreach for them or in the way we create stories for them. So typically that's what I've done in the past.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Matt, anyway. Yeah. I'm not going to attack that. Could you pass that back, please?
Thank you. Blimey. It's a question for Iliyana. It's again another very insightful presentation.
Thank you.
As a PR professional myself, it was really fascinating to see your perspective, and I was just nodding all the way through when you kept on talking about fear. I thought, oh yes, all the brands I've dealt with, they've had a phobia of PR almost. But your presentation was great on the proactive side of things. I was just interested to hear your thoughts in regards to the other two things which I feel brands are even more scared of, which is reputation management and crisis communications.
Sure.
I can see how in some of the inbound PR that you can adapt to that, particularly in crisis communication, where you think, okay, you have to think about your brand, you have to think about your reputation, but then how do you incorporate those purely into inbound PR?
I think really when it comes to crisis reputation, it's all about having a plan in advance. A lot of companies actually fail to do that, and they find themselves in a crisis situation and they just react. So they're not very proactive with it. And I think a lot more companies are becoming scared of that just because we've seen so many fails online, especially in social media, everything spreads. Exactly. So I think that just needs to become part of the overall goal. So if we're doing PR, then what's the purpose of PR for a brand? And probably crisis management is going to be one of those. And then we're going to have to decide, all right, if it is one of those, then what type of tactics are we going to use to ensure that if we find ourselves in a crisis situation, we can properly manage that situation. So it really is going to have to start at the beginning of your strategy, and then the rest are really just tactics.
Next question. Could we pass the box along? While that's happening, actually, can I repeat the same question to Ketna? Because I'm thinking that the whole social strategy is also about preparing for that type of situation. Have you got experience of that?
Yes, and so, like you said, putting a plan together beforehand. So you need to understand, carry out some social listening. Then you need to understand which stakeholders need to be made aware of, who needs to be alerted within the business so that they can react, or the right people can react to the relevant crisis it is. But the other thing that social media listening helps you to do is understand, well, is it noise or is it an actual crisis? So that's the thing that you've kind of got to be able to differentiate between as well. So it's having that process in place so that you can understand, well, what's noise, what's not, who needs to get involved, how do we need to tackle this?
So there's a danger of actually overreacting or preemptively
because that's
reacting
what people
to something.
tend to do. Yeah. And then that can also have implications to your brand and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. Who's got the box?
Hello. Thank you for your talk, and I find it really insightful and useful. So my name is Amir, and I work as managing a brand for an influencer. So I'm essentially trying to turn an influencer into a business with assets and a global brand. So my question follows up on the previous question on crisis management, and it says essentially, so what strategies and methods can someone like me use in order to prevent and reduce the risk of litigation against the brand that you're creating?
So was that for me?
For anyone.
Oh, okay. Does anyone else? So sorry, I just want to make sure I understand your question properly. So are you looking for a influencer strategy, or?
So I'll give it, like, for example, Facebook, they had a few problems with litigation. There's other companies who they inadvertently or kind of, I guess, indirectly infringe on someone else's copyright without knowing. And then other ways in which, the thing is, litigation is so complicated, and it's kind of what strategies can we use and do so that as we're growing the brand, we can avoid expensive litigation, so that I guess 80% of our budget isn't going towards costly lawyers, and it's going towards creating a really great experience for our users.
Well, I think that kind of goes back to my point of social media is not there's no magic bullet.
Mm.
It's going to highlight problems that you have within your business, so you need to be able to get that in place beforehand. In terms of what you can do on social, it comes back to the governance piece. So you need to be able to have strong governance within your organization to be able to almost preempt some of this, like what's going to be said. Because I think it sounds like what you're sort of saying is crisis management.
It's avoiding rather than actually getting it.
So it's being preemptive.
Yeah.
Yes. So you can't control what's going to come your way, but you can control how you behave to it, and it's having that process in place.
And it's also putting some limits and structure for your employees,
Absolutely.
so that they have some guidance, because
Yeah.
most companies don't do that,
Yes.
and therefore you don't know what you're going to get.
Well, and that's where you have guidelines. That's why you have policies. That's why you have to repeat yourself to death when it comes to a lot of this, because everyone has their preconceived ideas of what, say, social media is, and how they need to behave on there. Because somebody in your organisation will say, this is how we have to react to this. And then there'll be somebody else that says, no, we stay quiet. So it's understanding, well, you need to have that group of people together and understand, well, how do we behave like this? And trying to identify processes where you can then react to certain situations. So what you're trying to look at is scenarios and then put processes in place.
Can you elaborate a bit on the processes?
Sorry?
Can you elaborate a bit on the processes?
Okay, so for example, if you are approached, like let's just say somebody's talking about your brand and they are saying something negative about your brand, then what you're trying to do is that you need to be able to, what I mean by processes is getting those people in a room, so it could be your legal or compliance people, it could be your branding team, it could be your communications people, whoever they may be that are relevant stakeholders to be able to sort of deal with that, having those people in place. So then you're sort of saying, well, how do we now cascade this communication across? So so what I'm trying to sort of say is that you have to have, you have to sort of design what this process is. So you're going to have to kind of go through the pain of understanding what the first process is going to look like, and then everything else can then be, that's how you sort of scale it. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, everyone's processes are so unique, and everyone will sort of react to this so differently, but
You have to brainstorm a whole series of different scenarios.
Yeah, and so it's bringing everyone's opinions together and then working out the best way that you can do that, and then devising your process on the back of that. And everyone's will be so different. So I don't want to prescribe what the process will be, but as in everyone's will be different. So it's bringing those right people in.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you pass the box down?
Thank you. Any thoughts on IP protection in this new world where we're sharing everything about everything? How do you protect your brand?
It's a must. It's not even an option. I think it's when it comes to intellectual property, you need to do it at the start, especially when your brand is not of value. This is what happened to Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren, funny story. Ralph Lauren has managed to protect the IP everywhere except from South Africa. So a brand actually created a brand that looks exactly like Ralph Lauren in South Africa, and they tried to go through a number of lawsuits to get into the close, but they couldn't because they have not protected. So I think again it comes back to a strategy in terms of your expansion, in terms of how far do you want to go and protect it there. If you know that your reach is international, probably not from the start, but you have a base to start with and then extend it. But again, you don't want to spend too much time. I've seen people who spend too much time spending on patenting and all these things, and actually they don't use the money in developing the product and getting a proof of concept. So definitely intellectual property as a minimum is key. Yes.
Yeah, quick.
When we're talking about sales and email sequences, you've been mentioning that...
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
When we're talking about sales and email sequences, you mentioned that we have to be very personal in the emails, which we utilize in my company anyways. And what's the best ways to keep the message short and very personal, like in a way like, shall we connect it to LinkedIn connection? Shall we just approach them in some different way? What's the best practices really?
Again, something comes back to understanding your customer. You know, the more you understand their journey, the more you're able to adapt, to find the best way to communicate with them. Again, never make assumptions. You have to, and sometimes you start with a conversation with your existing customers. We want that you go to the people that you like the most and have that conversation, so you understand what do they consume as information, how do they like to be talked to. You know, do they prefer email content, do they prefer LinkedIn, and so forth. But do never play guess. You have to go back to what you have, and then from that you know what is the best effective way to communicate. But again, you have lots of tools that obviously HubSpot, I don't want to plug in, but HubSpot allow you to do to get to that level where you can really observe your customer behavior. I don't know if you want to say something else.
No, it's just, it resonates. It's exactly right. I mean, that is the inbound methodology, and it starts with the persona, the buyer persona. So you have to understand the person, the recipient of this email. You have to understand their goals and their problems, the tone of voice that you address, and how they like to absorb content, exactly as you said, right? Is it visual? Is it a video that you send them? Is it an email or not? Maybe people don't want to receive that email. Yeah, so that comes out of persona research, and it's the first part. You really need to do that in depth, and that leads to messaging across multiple, the whole, to use a terrible term, omni-channel marketing, right? But it is important to get your message right across those different channels.
Can I add to that? I'm going to give you a tip that I've used that worked really well. So what we did at the end of last year, we decided to conduct success story interviews for the ideal customers that we want to get, which allow us to collect information about them, because we knew exactly who we wanted, and they were open to give us information in terms of how they succeeded, and people love success stories. So you're providing good value for your audience, and at the same time you get to understand exactly who they are, and then that allows you really to form, as is mentioned, a brand persona. It's a great technique because people love to share their story, people love to talk about themselves. At the same time, you can collect information about them.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions? Yeah, can you pass it sideways? Sideways and forward. And we're probably going to make this the last question. Oh, cool.
You mentioned about, or all of you mentioned actually, about making it about the customers' stories. So I'm in video production. So how would you recommend you can convince the brands of that? Because often the brands want to talk about themselves and make the logo bigger or whatever. So how can you sell that to the brand that really should be talking about their customers?
Okay. Yes, I think you can do both. You can visit. You don't have to go against the agenda, but at the same time build a story so it includes their story as well in it. But they need to start with the customer, and then when they have their attention, then they can talk about themselves. But remember, the brand. We are selfish people, so explain exactly how it works, and give them some. What you can do as well is to give them examples of competitors who have done successful video stories and have done it to support your point. And from that, again, they will just buy into it. And then again, so people are looking for reassurance of your ideas, so use that and then explain how you will do it better because of your expertise. Remember, you only want to work with people who trust you for what you do. If they guide you and think they can do the job better, there's no point. You're wasting your time and they're wasting their money. So yeah. So that's the best way to do it.
I think you need to make it a win-win for both of them, right? Like we do that a lot at HubSpot, so we do a lot of case studies with our customers and with our partners, and there's always a good mix of their story, and our story as HubSpot, and then our story together as HubSpot and the customer, or HubSpot and the partner together.
I'd say try to do some testing with them to show them the value of what you're trying to convey and what you're trying to get across in terms of the customer comes first. Show them maybe two videos and show them statistics as well, because that could also support everything you're trying to convince them on.
Fantastic.